So imagine architecture without us, and thinking about what that means. I won't spoil the topic or the content of the lecture, but I want to take the time to introduce our speakers. Eric Ball is a New York-based architect and managing principal of Henning Larsen's U.S. office, where he leads the firm's practice across the Americas. Previously, Eric was with other global design firms, such as Foster & Partners and Agile Associates in New York City, building a portfolio of projects in the U.S. spanning cultural, civic, education, residential, and commercial projects. Beyond practice, Eric is deeply engaged in New York's civic and cultural life. He mentors college students in the region through the Architectural House annual program, is a past participant of the Open House New York Weekend Council, serves on the Urban Land Institute's mentorship committee, co-chairs the LGBTQIA+ committee at AIA New York, and teaches professional practice here at City Tech. So if you see him in the evening, he's gonna be here Wednesday evenings. Please come and say hi to him. And we have second speaker, Nitsan Bartov. Is an architect, computational designer, and PhD fellow at Henning Larsen in Copenhagen. His research explores how AI, data, and systems thinking can inform regenerative approaches to architecture and urban design, bridging creative intuition with analytic tools to support more resilient and responsive cities. Outside practice, serves as a board member at Building Diversity, a nonprofit organization promoting equity and inclusion in the built environment, and as identity manager at Roadskill Festival, where he oversees the festival's visual and spatial identity. So very, very fortunate to have you both here. I will let you take over.
All right. Thank you, Jieun. Nice to be here this evening. Let me unmute. Okay, so let's dive right in. So started to figure out when I saw one of architects, but it was meant to be a little bit controversial and a little bit provoking, but it actually is tied to an exhibition that was at MoMA back in the 1960s. And the exhibition was really focused on nomadic indigenous architecture globally. And so I thought that was an interesting pairing as we talk tonight about some of the work Henning Larsen has done recently around bio-based materials, which in many ways uses some of that thinking around local context and local ways of developing materials in different industries in the context in which they operate, paired with the climate we're in now around artificial intelligence and what the production of that is doing around the industry. So I thought that was a nice pairing of the two. So that's why each of us are going to take kind of a position on that and talk through what that looks like. So let me get into things here. So whenever someone comes and talks to you all from a company, you certainly want to hear about their work. So I don't want to ignore the portfolio of Henning Larsen. So I'll just talk to you a little bit about the company, but the company is global. It's based in Copenhagen, Denmark. A lot of the portfolio over the decades it was founded in the late 1950s is in the Nordic, Scandinavian region of Europe. But certainly things have expanded beyond that. Recently, in the US, we opened the office here around 2017. I'll talk a little bit about some of that portfolio, but the intent is really to get into the bio-based projects. But this just kind of speaks to the global nature of the company itself, really focused on transformation and regenerative projects. Certainly human-scaled campuses and innovative districts, transit-oriented development, climate adaptation, resiliency, urban spaces, and harbor and waterfront. So it's, a approach that I think when I speak about the research and the bio-based material strategy of Henning Larsen, I think it really is apparent. You'll see why these types of projects are so important to have that kind of impact that we see in the communities and the neighborhoods in which we work. So like I said, the company was founded in 1959. I'll speak a little bit too about the ownership structure of the company, which is pretty fundamental to the research that we're able to do. There's not an ability to understand the research without understanding how we're owned and how we operate. So I'll talk about that a little bit. We're 650 people globally. It's an international reach. And we'll talk a little bit about the industrial PhD program, which is at the heart of how we do that research. We operate in many countries around there's studios in 8 different countries. The focus is really in the New York office. There's 30 of us. and we oversee a portfolio across the US and Canada and down into Mexico. There's offices in Europe that are in Copenhagen and Berlin and Munich and the Faroe Islands and Oslo, and then in Southeast Asia in Hong Kong, Singapore, and Sydney. Like I said, the New York studio was established in 2017. The clients range from public and private institutions, developers, and a lot of municipal city work. So we're proud that the focus of the work in the US has always been about impacting the public and the general audiences that they serve. So I'll speak, maybe I'll skip over the industrial PhD program because it'll require me to move the computer over there and I think we'll lose the flow, but we will talk about it when Nitsan speaks later, but it's really interesting partnership that the office has in the country of Denmark to really bring a lot of the academic research happening in universities into the company itself, which really distinguishes us as an architectural practice globally. There's not many that have that part of the business model. We also publish books, and a lot of them are open sourced. So not just publications like It Begins with Curiosity, but Unboxing Carbon, Design with Knowledge. These are things you can find on our website. Plant a Seed, you can download them in full for free. So it's also about creating and developing research that then is generous. We're at a time where I think generosity is seen as not something inherent to the private sector, but as a company, it's really fundamental to what the values are and what we do. So we really just don't research and come up with things, but we put it out into the world and make it fully accessible to all. We also do exhibitions about our work and about some of those things that we do. So this was a Changing Our Footprint exhibition that was about the bio-based materials. It was in Copenhagen for a while. So there's also part of the practice that really is about taking this knowledge out into the communities and teaching the general public at large. The Unboxing Carbon was actually a course that was led by the company. So that is available online to look at as well. So in terms of the scales in which we work, it's really across architecture, urbanism, landscape, and the research part. What I want to talk about tonight is really the research side of things. I think that really speaks to the topic and the theme at hand. I'm not going to get into a lot of the architecture or landscape projects, but the company at large, I mean, it's really about designing at eye level. It's about openness and creations, which finally, of course, is what architects are really there to do. I'll move quick through some of these so I can get into the research side of things, but it's really about applied research. So Nitsan will PhD individuals and the things they're focused on. Nitsan is currently focused on artificial intelligence, but in the past, the company has had individuals focused on microclimate energy design, smart path findings, generative design, urban noise, daylight, safety of spaces was another topic too that comes into my mind that I don't see on this, and sort of virtual soundscape. So it's really about taking, and when I speak about how the company is financially structured, it's about taking some of those profits that we earn from the projects and putting it into research that allows us to continue to innovate and provide something back in a generous spirit to the community. So at the center of all of this is us as a company, Henning Larsen, and then around that, we really see it as bands of the research. So whether it's around urban economics, a lot of our work right now is about designing for disassembly. So I'll speak a little bit more materials or acoustics or energy design, artificial intelligence. So there are really these bands of research that allow the company to kind of put feelers out into the world and allow kind of a slowness, which I think the nomadic and kind of architecture without architects is talking about. I think all of us are so driven by demands from clients and time. So what the reason, I mean, Nitsan has a different perspective on it, but it kind of allows you to slow down a little bit and maybe focus and become hyper obsessed about one thing, which I think in our current moment, our attention spans and our ability to really focus and dive deep seems to be waning. So I think research allows you to get back into that. I think the other thing that's interesting to talk about is the expectations that we're receiving from clients. And I'll talk a little bit about how Henning Larsen is structured and why I think that's so unique. But, in the decades before us, it was really about kind of management, big and structured companies, ownership and control, about the product and designing for the client. It's always a tug of war a bit, but what I can sense, especially in future generations, is a bit more of a small and dynamic structure of practice, and also what the clients, we're mirroring how they're structured as well. A lot of their decision-making is much more shared and open and flexible. And it's really about, I mean, the term collaboration is certainly overused in the industry, but it's about designing with them, maybe not even calling them a client, but a collaborator. And so the business model needs to adapt to meet those needs. And we're fortunate enough, even as a large company, to be structured in a way that allows us to do that. The philosophy of the company, some things are very visible to you as an architect. I mean, we always start with curiosity. I think, as all of us New Yorkers know, it's a very great place to be curious. There's a lot to learn, but that allows us to kind of frame the opportunity and challenge. And then the invisible is really where the research comes into play of using the evidence and collecting the data. A lot of the things that have driven the research or the practice has been around human or community or carbon or nature. It's also kind of been that space that behind the scenes the company has gravitated towards. And then it's about then bringing that back above the surface, so to speak, and delivering the value and the impact, and doing something that's measurable then, and also continuing to inspire. So it's interesting always to think about a philosophy of seeing things in plain sight and then looking under the surface and designing for those invisible things, ideally through research that we don't quite know. So the projects I'll show you tonight were really founded in the bio-based impact of decarbonization for net zero. They're also about the ecosystems in which and the communities in which they come from and allowing them to thrive. Using those materials also allows for a management of local resources and also a circularity of materials. And then it certainly helps communities be more resilient and create a more healthy place to live. So the projects don't exist in isolation. They're kind of platforms and small ways to test and experiment and then scale. So I'm excited to show you a couple things tonight that we've been able to scale successfully across the company. Two of them are schools that we've done, and I'll dive in a little bit deeper in a second, but it always was about scaling them. So from a small school of 2,700 square feet that was completed in 2022, entirely clad in straw, to a much larger school of over 100,000 square feet, taking those tests and knowledge from those smaller prototypes and then ultimately scaling into what's under construction now, which is the largest straw and largest mass timber building in Europe, devoted to logistics, a logistics center right outside of Amsterdam. All of that is really about the key to biogenic materials is reducing upfront CO2 emissions from the start. So that's the advantage of using these materials. It also is about allowing for the unexpected. So this is something, and let me make sure I read from this so I'm honest, but this is something we did with the Polytechnic Institute in Milan for Design Week just in April or March, and it was 80 mycelium spheres that were grown from hemp, flour, sugar, and hemp flour and sugar, and it allowed for change. So some of these things, and all materials change over time, and many in the practice have used varying degrees of mushrooms or anything in that vocabulary. But I think it's also to acknowledge as architects that you can't control things, and so you should actually set up a system that can reflect the reality of the living planet we're a part of. So this was a play on that. Let me talk a little bit about the structure of the company. So Henning Larsen is part of a larger entity called the Ramble Group and also the Ramble Foundation. So we as Henning Larsen are the architecture, landscape, and urbanism part of that. We have one ownership, one organization, one vision, but we are two different brands. The Ramble side of the organization is focused on incredible scale of impact as well, founded in the same values of the company that are really around sustainable societies for all. Ramble focuses on engineering across transport, energy, water, management and health, management consulting, environment and health, excuse me, and buildings. But what I really wanted to touch on quickly, and I don't need to get too in the weeds about how the company is structured, I'm happy if anyone wants to speak a little bit further, but really about the philanthropic side of the company. So let me not skip over anything here. But so the ultimate owner of the company is the Ramble Foundation. They own about 97% of the shares of the business. And so what they do with the profits of the company is reinvest in research and reinvest in grants. So there's ways in which we work that still allows for competition and allows us to thrive and still pursue work and have a healthy careers. but the proceeds and profit of the company are not benefiting a handful of individuals. They're benefiting a foundation structure that gives back to the community. So that's really at the heart of what the research and development program that we'll talk about next is able to do through that mechanism. So the foundation board is the ultimate stewards of the company, and in terms of 2025, how they shared the profits of the company were across mission-driven philanthropic activities within the geographies. So that was around regenerative rebuilding, the built environment, and resource management. And then they also give global grants outside of the actual company itself, and they gave grants to aid in emergencies and crises, and then also anything related to employee engagement initiatives. So you as an employee, if you're facing hardship, can also apply to get a grant from the foundation. So also, they funded these projects I'm going to talk about tonight. So they founded a project that's on Governor's Island. It just wrapped up, but it was Climate Cover. I'll get into a little bit more about that. They funded a farm to home initiative, which was really about the research and development of the straw that was used in those two schools and the larger distribution center for bestseller. And then they also funded here in our backyard the Parsons Healthy Materials Lab, which was really about healthier alternatives to toxic building products. I won't get too into the weeds about the where the money's gone, but if there's further time for that, I'm happy to talk a little bit about how they do that. Let me get into the projects. So I'll talk first quickly about the Climate Cover project. So Climate Cover was a research project we did in tandem through funding from the Ramble Foundation, but it was done in partnership also with the University of Pennsylvania. And these panels that were developed, let me get into the visuals, but the panels that were developed are 4 feet by 4 feet panels that are both radiant cooling and heating. And the key to this was also being produced without condensation. And all of these panels were built for disassembly. And the focus here, as I get into the slides, was really about how do we address extreme heat events around the world quickly and in a way that can scale. So I don't need to show you a graph like this that I think all of us know that the climate is experiencing the most extreme temperatures we've ever seen and will continue to see. So the challenge was, though, in those moments of extreme heat, how do we create something that can scale and protect the health of the public? So our solution was to partner with the University of Pennsylvania and some of the technology that they've developed to think about modular systems that can be radiant and cool and heat in these events. So it's low cost. I can speak a little bit about that, but the panels themselves, it's a low energy system. It uses 10 times less energy than conventional air conditioning. All of the water that's used in the system is recirculated entirely. And it's chilled water that is moving through micro tubes that are enclosed in a transparent radiant panel, drawing heat directly from the body. It's a protective membrane that allows for infrared radiation to pass through. And then the fabric that we install on top is also protecting the public from the heat. So here's the panel that was developed. All the other components of this system were also exposed. So the solar panels were exposed, the chiller, the water tank, the piping, even the wood frame that was done on the site was from a lightweight post frame and timber that was salvaged from fire and mitigation projects. The PV panels were also recycled from decommissioned installations. So it really speaks to that circularity of all of the material involved. It was located right on, I guess I would consider kind of the backside of Governor's Island. It was there. We opened it in late August of this year, and it ran. It was part of Open House New York this year as well. We just decommissioned it a couple weeks ago. But it was a prototype and an example of a system that now in 2026 we're going to scale in other ways. So more to come on where this gets deployed, but it's a solution that allows for deployment in many different types of events, whether it be a bus shelter or just immediate shelter for anyone out in the outdoors. So also acknowledgments to all the different partners that were involved in that as well. So certainly an example of taking the research side of the practice, looking into context globally to how to deploy something. So that's climate cover. And the last one I'll talk about before we get into the AI portion of the conversation was about the school that I showed you earlier. So the reason that straw was selected, let me get to the straw portion of this. So the Sunday school is because the reason they chose straw is it really is the fastest growing biomass available globally. So it was something that can be produced everywhere, and it's going to be used anyway at the end of its life. So why not use it for cladding of a building? There's no off-gassing involved. It also speaks to the certain communities around the world where it feels very local and feels very intuitive to material that they don't know. And then the company also looked in the slides I had earlier for the Sunday school kind of back to certain Viking developments that were done in circles. So there was an existing ring on this site. This was located in the southern part of Denmark, the school itself. But it was, it was the beginning of testing a material on the side of a school that could be scaled. So, and all of the research was done through the funding from the organization. And then, of course, there's lots of fire testing involved in all this. We're also continuing to develop this as a prototype for housing. So we're currently looking at a couple different prototypes with them to how to scale this to homes as well. But this is some images of the fire testing of the material. I believe it met 2 hours.
Is it a 2-hour video?
Yeah. And then the last one was the bestseller project where this is being executed, as well as the cladding of the material. It's over 430,000 square feet of this. So the schools were for 600 students. So I think there's also a portion of this that is just about scaling it. So, all right, let me switch over now. So let me go over to you.
So thank you for inviting me. It was a kind of a hand invitation from Eric, but thank you for hosting me. I'm going to talk about what I call architectural intelligence. If you think that this sounds a little bit like artificial intelligence, this is intentional. So I am what we call in Denmark an industrial PhD. My background is in architecture. I did a 5-year B.Arch degree in Tel Aviv University. And then I did my master's in Copenhagen in the Royal Danish Academy. And now I am enrolled in the Royal Danish Academy as a PhD student, but I am an employee at Henning Larsen as an architect and a researcher. It's a really unique setup that we have in Denmark, where you can kind of be in this potential overlap between architecture and academia, and you do your best to get the best of both worlds, because when you work in research, yeah, I can't continue like
So sorry.
I have to, yeah.
Technical difficulties, people.
What is that? Oh, am I sharing this screen?
Yes, correct.
Yeah. So let me fix this. I'm super good at this. Now I'm sharing the other one.
No, this is what you see in the live.
It's not changed.
No. On the it's a different screen.
Please thumbs up. Thumbs up.
Okay.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Please proceed.
No problem. Sorry about this. So I'm in the interface between architecture, practice, and academia. When you work in academia and research, you have to follow scientific rigor, which means you actually have to stand behind the claims that you make, and you have to have a thorough research, and you have to have reasoning for making certain claims. These are things that practice is not bound to. But when you're in practice, you're actually where things are happening. Where in many cases, when you work in academia and you're a professor, you're kind of floating away with different ideas that don't have a lot of relationship with what's actually happening in the practice. And this gap is frustrating for a lot of people. That's why in Denmark, where there's not a lot of problems, they have the opportunity to develop things like this. And where I stand is in another interesting overlap, and it's between architecture and artificial intelligence. These are two vast fields where people are still trying to find out where do they meet each other. Architecture is quite old, but even AI has been around for a while now. I would say 6, 7 years that we've been kind of hearing about it, but nobody really knows how is AI applied for architecture? Like, what should we do with it? How is this? Is it useful for us? Is it dangerous for us? Nobody has a clear answer. Some people have in their head, but they wouldn't be confident to talk about it. So I'm doing my research on this. I'm trying to find out what exists in that overlap. A little bit about my research, the more academic side of things. I'm looking into what's called regenerative urban design. I'm kind of wrapping up this part now and get to know the place that we're going to work in. And what feeds into this is this idea of urban data. I'm going to talk a lot about data, potentially tying up those different topics together. This is where I'm seeing a little bit of the potential overlap, but there's a little bit more. So for those who have not encountered the term regenerative urban design, it is referring to an approach that looks at sustainability and says sustainability comes from the word sustain. Sustain means leaving things the way they are, not causing any more harm. So if something is bad, you say, at least you cannot blame me because I am net zero. But regenerative approach kind of says we cannot really afford to keep things the way they are. Things are already too bad and they have like a downward facing vector. So we have to be improving actively different aspects of our environment when we're doing architectural projects. So this is the first part of my PhD. The second is about site analysis. You guys study architecture or teach architecture? Most people here? Yeah. If you do, don't say anything. Okay, so all of you. But we have a tradition of site analysis. I did not come up with that term. There's actually quite a strong foundation of how we approach a site, and it's well documented. It's very interesting. It's also very useful. But what it's missing is this idea of working with data. Data is not the same as seeing the site as nature, or looking at a city through the lens of its history, or identifying the different 5 elements of the Kevin Lynch. Like, this is not data. Data is a relatively new thing. There are data-driven practices like pharma, like I don't know, almost every technological service, but we don't really know how to work with data properly. And this is where I hope AI could kind of come in and rescue us from this gap that we have from data. I'm looking at how AI could be used so that we can actually achieve regenerative urban design. And in my idea, AI is actually getting us closer to the data by being our own little data analyst. AI has the capacity to take in data in different formats from different sources and actually pre-process it like the bird is eating the worm to feed we are the little baby birds here. We don't know anything about data. We're terrified of numbers and words. But this could actually be handed over to us in a way that we can actually use. So why do we even need to do that? You know, most of the architecture that you like the most was designed and executed before people even used the term data. So we don't have to do it. But why is it that we should be doing it? I have some reasons. They convinced me. I don't know if they're going to convince you. I know a lot of architecture teachers that are not convinced. But let's first understand what is data. Data is not the same as everything that we know. Data is actually a very specific aspect of getting to know the world in a structured way. It's something that needs to be collected. It's something that needs to be mediated by technology. It's something that is almost exclusively in digital format. So if I go to a place and I'm saying, oh, this feels I'm feeling a little bit alienated here. I cannot put a number on this. I cannot say, oh, this is alienating 6.6. And this one is 7.8. So this one, like, data doesn't cover all of the knowledge that we can have, but it does cover a lot. Some of the characteristics that kind of separate data from other forms of knowledge, one is that it is constructed. I need to put numbers on something in order to transform it into data. It's not something that just reveals itself from thin air. It is inherently relational. It means that there is nothing that is kind of a total aspect of data. It only exists in relation to other things. There's not a place that is hot. There's a place that is hot compared to another place, but it would maybe be cold if I am underdressed. It is mediated by technology, so the technology that is used to collect the data, to analyze the data, to communicate the data is actually acting as a mediator, and some things could happen to the data even through this process of getting it closer to us or collected. It is embedded in social context, and it's also dynamic. So it's not something that just exists like a rock. It exists in a specific point in time, but then it can also change. What are the different types of data we use in architectural practice? One of them is what we call empirical data. Empirical data is data that describes what exists in a data way. Okay, like knowing what are the climate conditions, what are the soil conditions, how many people live in like demographic data, things that are data that is used to describe existing conditions. Then we have what is called analytical data, which is data that describes things that could be. When we do a simulation and we get some numbers about different scenarios, this is also data, but this is data of things that don't really exist. It's data that is predicting what could be in different scenarios. And then there's the human data, which is what is called in academia qualitative data, which represents what people need, what people want. Qualitative data, there's some scientists that would kind of argue that this is not as strong, but for us, it's an extremely valuable thing to work with. And we here accept it as data. Where do we get it from? In an architecture practice, there is the data that we just get. Sometimes the client will come in with massive amounts. It's like, here's the site, here's all the data. Now please use it. Sometimes we can get it from the municipality. Sometimes we find it on the internet. But then there's also data that doesn't exist or has not been collected or is not sufficient. So we go and we generate that data. Analytical data is something that we need to generate. We need to make those simulations to get that data. We need to go to the site, we need to take some measurements, we need to speak to the people, like to make up for all the data that we don't have if we want to use data for our decision making. The way we collect it is we can do it from our own little workstation. We can go to the site and investigate, and then we can engage with different people to collect the more qualitative data. How do we generate data that we don't have? That's going back to the slide that Eric showed before. We have a very extensive R&D department that is actually very, very capable of doing all of this grasshopper stuff and doing all of these simulations and then saying, like, in different scenarios, this is the data that allows me to evaluate ideas before they even exist from a data perspective. So working with wind, working with acoustics, working with sunlight, working with heat. All of these things are data that we can produce in order to evaluate things that we are planning to do. Then how do we analyze the data? Because data is raw. Data is just a number. Analysis is the process of taking the data and transforming it into knowledge or into insight. Data in itself is nothing. It doesn't give me anything. If I know that the temperature is 30, it doesn't tell me anything. But if I know that it's 30, but everywhere around is 25, then I'm learning that there could be a heat island in that little situation. And this is the analysis. So for the analysis, we actually have a lot of our own in-house experts. This is the R&D department. I think there's a few new faces coming in. Sila just left, actually. But this is very big. I don't know like how much you know about structures of architecture offices, but having this amount of people with different expertise, we have an anthropologist, we have an ecologist, we have a material scientist, we have people who are actually experts, so they can take in this data that is just numbers that no architect can actually decipher, and we can get insights and kind of drive ideas by analyzing the data with all of this expertise. And then it comes to the question from the beginning, why do we even want to use data? So one thing is because the modern challenges are not the same as the challenges that we faced 150 years ago when we built all these beautiful European cities without any data. And data allows us to work better with complexity. The second is that we're now in a system that demands accountability. You cannot just make decisions on a whim using other people's money. You have to show numbers that actually, you have to support your decision with science. It is very unfortunate for designers, but this is the current climate. Data helps you with something called optimization, where sometimes one solution can solve three different problems. And this is something that is intuitively very, very hard to grasp, but the data can actually indicate when can I actually, because I can only do one building, but where am I kind of being optimal with a lot of different aspects? And then the other opportunity that we have with data is about innovation, because data can sometimes reveal things about my design that I did not know. But the data actually shows me things that are supporting innovations and showing different new opportunities. Another reason to use data is because there's just a lot of data. There is so much data that is being produced. This is a graph starting in 2010. And like you can see, there's no point even showing it before 2010 because there was practically no data compared to what we have now. The amount of data that is just being produced is exponentially growing. And in architectural terms, this is happening like right now. There's buildings being built right now that were designed more than 15 years ago. So this is an extremely fast transition into just having a resource that we didn't have before. So we have to adjust to it and understand what this new resource is and how is it helpful for us. And then when you look at the data ecosystem inside architecture, what kind of data do we get? We get maps, we get soil condition reports, we get demographic data, we get historical photos of the site, we get interviews with the locals, we get building regulations, we get Excel sheets that talk about biodiversity and different species. This is a lot of data, and the data is in different formats and it's from different sources, and it's really, really hard to analyze this data. And then you go to the data analysis department in the architecture office, and you see that there is none. We don't have in-house data analysts in training. We have experts in different fields that can work with that specific data that is in their field. This is very unique to Henning Larsen. This doesn't exist in almost any other office that I know of. I'll be happily surprised to discover others. But we don't have this data literacy, and it is not studied at school, not in any school. So this is a problem. How do we bridge that gap of having all of this available data, wanting to use the data for better results, but having zero idea how to even approach this? I would assume that most people in practice, if you even ask them what is data, they might not have a good answer. And that's where I think artificial intelligence can be very useful for our profession. I know that people like to think about making nice images. That's also useful, and I'll get to that. But this is the actual gap that I'm seeing. I think that AI can synthesize data from different domains. It can communicate different insights in a much clearer way. It is able to identify what data I might be missing, because in many cases I'm just working with what I have. And I can get this kind of data-driven feedback for what I'm doing by continuously conversing with AI. And I think it's important to say that the whole conversation around AI should not be about AI, because AI is basically a channel to work with data. It's an LLM, like a GPT, is working with massive amounts of data, but it's still working with data. And by understanding data, you can really, really understand what it means to work with those different AI tools. Because what they practically do is they take in a massive amount of data, they identify different patterns within that data, and then they develop the ability to make predictions. And as this guy says, we often mistakenly associate intelligence with truth. So intelligence is the capacity to solve problems based on given, data and inputs, but it doesn't make things real. And it is called artificial intelligence and not truth machine for a reason. There are some ethical considerations to keep in mind when we're working with data. Data is a very strong thing to kind of shut down an argument. If you have something and then you're like, but the data says this would be, like I mentioned, really strong in pharma. If I did experiments and over 80% people didn't have side effects, I get FDA approval. Solved. Nobody has, there is no conversation around it. But we don't really work in a field that is like that. It's really hard to regulate the work with data. So there are some ethical things that we need to keep in mind when we start working with data and talking about data and claiming to be data-driven. The first example I'm going to give, it's about image generation. Image generation data sets is trained on largely on what is, like, it reflects what is popular and what is available on the internet. And we know what is in the internet. Is a lot of content from here, is not a lot of content from Venezuela. There's not many websites that share a lot of information in Bangladesh or China, right? We know that the internet is highly overrepresenting certain aspects of the world, but AI is giving this kind of pretense of like, I'm this kind of global body of knowledge. So if I'm using subjective terminology when I talk with AI, like make something that's beautiful, make something that's interesting, make something that's local, make something that's intimate, what I will get is a result that represents what is overrepresented in the globally available internet. And if I'm going to make a beautiful building, I'm very much likely to get something like this, and I'm very unlikely to get something like this. Even though most people will agree that this is more beautiful than the other one, maybe not everyone, but a lot, way more than the times that I will get this if I just type in words that are subjective. So subjectivity is a very big danger when the data that I'm basing things on is far from subjective. There's actually many points of view that are missing from the data that is used on these AI programs. They don't represent access to all of the available knowledge in the world. So this is something that we have to take into account when we converse with those different programs and we make decisions based on what they say. A lot of people are like, I asked ChatGPT, this is what ChatGPT said. This is usually a very kind of well articulated response to the question, but remember what it represents. Another thing to remember about data is that we are not meant to be a data-driven practice. Because even if we have all the data from all of the world, we don't design for the statistical majority. And the example that I'm giving in this beautiful drawing is if we were to be a data-driven practice, we would never build handicap ramps because there is no statistical justification for all the effort that comes into. There's just not enough people on wheelchairs. If we were a data-driven practice, but there are things that even the data suggests that are not, that we shouldn't do it, we should still do it. So when we're asking the data what we should and what we should not do, we should remember that we are not fully a data-driven practice anyway. And then when you use data to kind of reach an optimum, in this example, I'm thinking about, let's say everyone who wants to open a restaurant in New York City will go to ChatGPT and ask, what is the most profitable type of restaurant that I can make? There is an answer to this, and they will all reach the same answer, and then they will all lose money. So when you're looking at a scale that is more urban, trying to reach an optimum based on data will actually not lead to a good result because the synthesis between a diverse population is in itself quality that is not achievable with AI optimization. Then there's the question of accountability. And recently Deloitte, you guys know Deloitte? It's a serious company. They got sued for $440,000 for delivering a report that had quotes from papers that were never written. And the quotes don't exist. And you guys all know how that happens when you ask ChatGPT to write something for you. And it's like, oh, of course, there's this paper. But it is Deloitte that got sued. It's not OpenAI. OpenAI will not be sued because they have a little mark that says, actually AI can be wrong. When you use a calculator, you buy a calculator, there's no sign in the bottom that says, be mindful, calculator can be wrong. Right? But AI is covered for this, and who is not covered is the user of AI. So you are accountable for whatever comes out of AI. And if you're going to use AI and make it do things for you, remember that you are the one who's going to be held accountable. And if you're going to use AI to make designs and it's bad design, then you are a bad designer. You cannot come and say, well, I'm a great designer. It's just AI was, And we claim to be a data-driven design. And as I kind of mentioned before, data is not the whole picture. It doesn't equate design, and it's not the full decision-making only driven by data. The data can feed into the decision. It's important to know what the data says, but we cannot just say, well, this is the data, so this is the decision, that's it. Because then we are redundant. Then we are architecture without architects. Like this is, if I'm tying it up to the topic, the meaning of architect is because if we were this, then I would say, let's get rid of architects. What a waste of money if this only needs to be driven by data, but it doesn't. So we are actually very important because we need to understand how to balance what we learn from the data together with tacit knowledge, with human experience, with our own stylistic expression. Like all of these things come together. So I would argue that instead of being a data-driven design, we should be a data-assisted design. A little bit on how we use AI at Henning Larsen. There is this, people ask me like, are we gonna just, put a prompt and then get a building? So this is not possible. This will be possible, and it will be in a very low level. I would say within 2-3 years, maybe 4. And then it's gonna be pretty good within 6-7 years. But we're quite far from this right now. So we're not looking at something that will just kind of, I'll just put a prompt and I get the whole thing. What we're looking at is eating the cake by not shoving the whole cake of architecture into the mouth, but looking at what are the smaller things within the challenge of making a building that we can use AI to kind of improve. And there's some examples from the office. We use it in our communication with the clients, in our communication internally. We use it when we work with data, which is the kind of core of my PhD. We use it for exploring different media and visual expression. Some day-to-day tasks that are repetitive suddenly become much more useful, much more effective, and also storytelling, which, to be honest, like this is the profession. It's storytelling and visual communication. Like this is what this profession is built on. This is our main product. So looking at working with data, I'll just give you a quick example of a project that we had in Germany where we received the data from the client. It's an academic institute, Max Planck. He like invented science or something. And then we got 258 pages of data, hardcore, great data in German, 3.5 gigabytes. We had 2 German-speaking people on the team. We had 6 weeks to design a whole campus, and we were asked to be data-driven. So Joachim, one of our designers, actually went to this tool, Notebook 11, fantastic tool that actually allows you to collect all of the data that you have and start communicating with it in your own language. This is the bird chewing up the data for me so that I can actually ask questions and see what does the data say without having to be a data analyst. Is it as good as having data analysts in-house and processing the data for 6 months before coming to any conclusion? Probably not. But this, unlike the other thing, this is actually possible. And almost every decision in the project actually went through the validation of the data. There were major things that we've tested out, and the data says this actually doesn't align with the biodiversity plan that they have for the next 50 years in the Max Planck Institute. This one, you will not be able to put that program here because it's too close to the metro, and there's an electromagnetic field that will interfere with the microscopes of that lab. So this is something that this should be data-driven. We should consult with the data on this, but sometimes we don't have the opportunity. And even if it's written on the data, I don't even know how to read it. Yeah, we also use it for data visualization, where we have Jesse, our ecologist, who used AI to kind of map different relationships between plants and insects in another competition. I'll jump a little bit forward. Why is there 200 more slides here? Okay, yeah, because I don't know how much do I have left. Communication with client, I'm going to make an argument that you can't see it right now as students and maybe even some of the teachers, but I think also Eric mentioned it. We don't work in if you read The Fountainhead, where like you get a brief, you close the doors and you come out with a project. It doesn't exist. What exists is constant communication of working with the client towards the project. And I would say that the communication throughout the project is in many cases more impactful than the project brief. can come in with a brief to do one thing, and you can end up doing a completely different thing because of the way you communicated throughout the project. And the ability to work really, really quickly with high quality visuals that are curated in a smart way completely changes the way that we communicate with clients. One example is Frank, who was asked by the client, I want to do in the parking lot a street art gallery. This is something that could lead into 2 months of work where we reorganize the lighting and we put like stands to put in the gallery, and then we make a 3D model, and then we make a visualization, we send it back, and then the client is like, no, that's not what I meant, something else. But Frank was like, do you mean something like this? This is like within 5 minutes. And the client was like, no, that's not what I mean. I want something more curated, but also to feel a little bit like street art. So Frank was like, hold my beer. Do you mean this? And client is like, this is what I want. So the sharp people who work with AI will see that this is not the same parking lot. But does it matter at that point? It doesn't. And this is something that Frank knows we can do that because he's an architect. To create 100 different iterations, everyone can do that right now. But to know what could work and communicate it properly and be able to execute it within the budget, this is something that requires that skill. And this probably saved 2 months of work. Another one with Philip, a project in Dubai. The client sent him a photo. He's like, I'm in Spain on vacation. I found this really cool shading element. Can we use it in our project? This happens. This happens a lot. And Philip was like, well, it's going to look something like this. Immediately, within an hour, visualize it completely. And then the client said, oh, you know what? Then I don't want it. The amount of time saved and the amount of frustration saved when you can start using those things just for communicating throughout the process. Not like this is the final render that I'm printing on this is just a way for me to communicate instead of using all this cryptic terminology that we use in architecture. I think that's the last example. This is a multifunctional space. You guys know what a multifunctional space is? I don't. Martin knows, but also Eric knows, and they know different things. And the client doesn't know what the hell is a multifunctional space. The client asked that. Martin said, well, in that space, we can hold art exhibitions. We can have, launch events. We can have children playing activities. We can have more, fancy dinner events, and we can even do nighttime activities. This level of communication before AI, not possible. Today, possible. It's a binary flip into a way of communicating with a much higher degree of understanding. For ideation, this project that you've shown, actually, the Mycelium Pavilion, we looked online. How would the Mycelium Pavilion look like and feel like? There aren't any. There aren't that many. Definitely not ones made with spheres. So how do we communicate also internally? Like, how do we visualize to ourselves how something will feel that we've never seen and we haven't touched? When all we can do is kind of model it in Rhino. So we did go to AI and we asked AI, like, how would that look like? How would that feel? And we got these images, and then actually the final result is not that far. And this really helped throughout the process to know if we're kind of on track or not on track. And then the last example is how does it help us with storytelling? And the example that I'll give is this presentation. All of the drawings here are done with AI. Half of the slides here I have done one day before I had to present them. And I've done them in a highly curated way. Personally, I know how to draw, but not watercolors. I could have drawn everything, but if I want to change some slides for tomorrow morning, I can make highly curated, very, very specific images that are really within they really support my storytelling capability in a way that I couldn't before. And that's very powerful. We have an AI approach at Henning Larsen. It's based on 4 dogmas, where one is literacy. We look at AI not as a tool, but as a body of knowledge. We want people to know how AI works, and from that, they will figure out how to use it. We don't do anything like use this tool and then copy this prompt and then replace this with the city and replace this with this, and then you get good results. Because this is a completely redundant thing in that field where new models come out every week, new capabilities come out every week, LLMs change every month. Different people, they prompt in different ways. So understanding the underlying mechanisms of how AI works, we are teaching this throughout. That's why I'm in New York. I'm doing this workshop now for the New York office, and I'm doing it in all the other ones. And we see the kind of use cases emerge by people knowing how to use it properly. Where people, when they use AI, they say, I have used AI for this, and I have not used AI for this. And if they are asked why, they have a good answer. And if you use AI and someone asks, why did you use AI? And you don't have a good answer, so don't use it. But I wouldn't say don't use it. I say find good answers. The other one is transparency, which means we're being very open about using AI. We talk about it inside the teams. We talk about it with our clients. We always try to, like, when you have a culture of transparency, you develop this habit of like always having to have a good argument because you will be asked, even by your own team. And this works pretty well. Agency means that we want everyone to participate in learning about how AI works and what does it mean for our company. It's not this kind of focused little AI expert nerdy group in the corner that's doing all the AI stuff. Everyone in the company is participating in this, from communication to administration to landscape to architecture and urbanism. And the use cases are emerging from people who are actually working on projects. And the last one is accountability. So a culture of accountability, as I think I mentioned it before, it means if I did something bad with AI, then I did something bad. And I take full responsibility for that. But also, if I did something good and I used AI, then I did something good. And this is more of a cultural way of approaching this whole thing without saying like, oh, you used AI, so blah, blah, blah. If what I produced was good objectively, then it's good. And if I used AI, I will share how did I use and why did I use. But if I did it bad, it's objectively bad. And if I used AI and then it's bad, then it's a bad use of AI, but it's my use. Some final thoughts. The work with AI is not binary, is non-binary. It's not did I use AI or did I not use AI? This thing doesn't exist. We all use AI all the time. It's in every app. There's a lot of AI in the back end of almost everything. That when you listen to Spotify, you use AI because it's suggesting different songs, maybe changing your mood. Have I used AI? We always use AI, but it's not a binary question. It's more a question of a spectrum. How much am I letting AI be a part of that task? Am I letting AI do it completely by itself and just send it as is? Which could be the case if I'm replying to an email and I just like can just make a polite no, send. But if I'm speaking to a client, I'm sitting in a meeting. I don't want AI to sit in the meeting. I want to be fully autonomous on this. But then what if I let AI make something and I just supervise? So I just make sure it's good before I send it out. This will be more here on the spectrum there. But what if I say I write it, but then I give it to AI and I say, can you give me some comments on this? Can you check my grammar? What if I'm doing it like, where am I standing on the spectrum? And I need to have a good reasoning for why I'm here on the spectrum and not somewhere else. Another thought is this shift of skills between the old skills and the new skills. We need to get really like a little bit better at curating. When you're a maker of things, when you're a designer, a creator, you need to know how to make the thing, but you also need to know what is good. You need to be able to tell good from bad. You need to be intentional about what you want to produce, but the production is becoming much easier. The production could actually be delegated. But to, like I said, to make 100 iterations is easy. To make a good one is hard. So the ability to curate becomes a much more kind of, it becomes a bit more prominent in the skills that we need to have as designers. And the last slide is about, there is no end to learning about AI, at least at the moment. We're not looking to find the Revit of AI. And then like, okay, so Midjourney is good for that. We're finished. Let's get back to work. The idea is that we are continuously learning about it. This is the goal. Every 3 months, we will look again and reevaluate. Are we using it right? Are we using the same things? There are no manuals for this. I have a lot of other slides about how AI works and why am I saying those things that I'm saying. But just take it as a fact for now. Yeah, thank you so much. I'm finished with my presentation. I took a little bit of extra time. I took the liberty, but we're close to the Statue of Liberty, so you're welcome to connect with me on Instagram or LinkedIn if you have further questions in the future. I'm very approachable and should I let's make this slide.
That's great. That's a great one. Thank you so much, both. Let's give a round of applause for our speakers today. We're going to start. I'm just going to pull up my chair. Snake just right in the middle. Before opening up to audience questions, which we'd love to hear, maybe we can start with one question. Because we ended with the AI lecture, maybe we can talk a little bit about the question on authorship, right? Who is the author in all of these process of creation? So should we be thinking of the AI just as another, delegation tool that we can use in the industry? And how do we now begin to think about this idea of certain kind of brand, right? Henning Larsen is a brand. Any of the architectural offices out there is a brand, right? They have their stamp on authorship, right? At least that's how it used to be as a traditional practice in architecture. But it seems that we have already begun to talk about architecture as a more collaborative practice rather than the fountainhead model. And it seems like we're becoming more open source, accessible. So how do offices control their copyright? Who does it belong to, right? Who's making it? And because you work across in many different geographies, Europe versus in Asia, what is the general conversation on this question?
You start a little bit.
I'll start.
Yeah, sorry.
Well, I think that the first thing to say about it is that this is a question that now opens up. It's a question that was not open, and it's something that sometimes I say that we are the ones doing architecture because we are the only ones who can do architecture. We're protected by some laws that you're not allowed to sign off a building if you don't have the degree, and we're also protected by a fence of skills. Like people cannot do architecture because they cannot draw a plan, and they cannot do the introduction of IKEA, right? Because if you make a table, if you want a table for your kitchen, you have to go to a carpenter. Unless you can build it yourself, which most people can't, but you have to go to a carpenter. You have to wait for a month and you have to pay a lot of money and you get a pretty decent table or a not so good table. And then IKEA came and said you can actually get a really, really good quality table, well designed, and you can get it today and you can get it for a fifth of the price, if not 5% of the price. And this did not kill carpentry, but it made carpenters, it forced them into saying, what is my unique value that will make people wait all this time and pay all this money to get something? What is the value that I bring on top of what everyone can do themselves? And this is a little bit, it's going to happen to architecture, hopefully, that everyone will be able to do architecture by themselves. And it's going to be okay. It's going to be not so bad, probably better than a lot of the things we have today. And then architects will have to really find out what is it that makes me unique and valuable. And this will be their authorship. They will have authorship over the value that they bring on top of what is readily available for everyone.
Yeah, I mean, and then to speak a little bit about the intellectual property, I mean, a lot of the conversations we have with clients is negotiating those terms specifically, and there's also a lot of clauses in our contracts now that require you to reveal what programs you're using. So a lot of that transparency that Nitsan was talking about is happening in the negotiations of the contract. So I think that continues to protect architects over the IP of their own product. But to Nitsan's point about what people are engaging with when they choose which firm to work for or work with, it comes down to the people and the ability to curate and understand the need of the individual in the project. So I think nothing is taking that from architecture firms. Ultimately, you're buying into a culture and a practice and the individuals that you're engaging with on a project. And that is the best asset we have is who we are as people and the people you bring into a company to work with and engage on the sort of curation of the final product.
Thank you. Any questions from the audience? Questions?
Yeah, we go. Two.
Hi, my name is Joshua. So I have a question for you.
Yeah.
So like recently talking about a lot about like AI and how we can use it to help us to be more creative and to be able to be more to be able to be more helpful with the projects and everything. Why would you recommend AI in general rather than just doing all the creativity yourself?
First of all, I wouldn't recommend AI. I would recommend trying out AI and being very honest about the evaluation of how much it adds value to your work. Because if you are better than AI, don't use AI. And if AI is better than you at something, then use AI. But in terms of creativity, I think that's actually kind of revealing itself to be one of the least used things in offices. Because I'm very aware of the landscape of what's happening in different offices and how they use AI. And this idea of like generating ideas with a prompt, almost nobody's using it. And this has been around for a while. But if there's one thing that we're actually quite good at, is coming up with creative design ideas. This is the only thing we're good at, basically. So I wouldn't recommend it, but it is out there for you. And I would urge you to try it out and see for yourself. And if it helps you, use it. If it doesn't, then don't. But then when you try it out for yourself and you develop your own kind of approach to it, and if someone asks you why you would use it, you would have a good answer. And I actually didn't show any example where it's being used as a creative helper. You said that I'm kind of advocating for it. I'm not, even though we have examples. But I don't think it's very useful, honestly. I think it's very, very useful for the things that I've shown, like working with data. The what?
For analyzing data, right?
For working with massive amounts of data that we have zero training in how to decipher and how to have it impact our decision making. Architecture is not just design. It's a lot of decision making. It's a lot of points where I have to make a decision between A and B, or A and B and C, or A to Z. I just need to make a decision, and there's hundreds in every project. Some of the decisions I want to take full agency, and I want to say this is my decision because I believe that an arch at the entrance would be better than a gate. I believe in that. There's no data to support this, but this is what I think is best for the project. But there's some decisions, like where would I put the lab with that sensitive microscope? I would like the data to tell me if I'm too close to the metro station, because the ground vibrates and it will destroy my experiments. And this is still within my responsibility as an architect to also make things work. So I have to be able to work with the data, and I have to have access to what the data says, and AI can bring it much closer to me. But in terms of using AI for generating ideas, well, I'll tell you a little secret. Not everyone is really good at designing. You know who's not really good at designing? Me. I'm not super good at it. I'm pretty good at evaluating good design, and I'm using a lot of AI. But my goal is to produce good design. And I know some people in our office that are super talented designers, and they have tried AI, and they said, I've made 300 iterations. I'm not happy with any of them. I'll just do it myself. And then they do it themselves. And then we would have an intern who has designed 3 things in their lives. But they have generated some nice stuff with AI when their job was to try different things. And they've curated like 5 different options. And this ended up being quite useful. So I would say try everything out and have a very honest evaluation of the outcome. Did you increase quality or not? If yes, use it.
Thank you.
There was another question this way.
Hello, and thank you for coming to our school. My name is Vlad, and I'm very curious in this system that you mentioned between your PhD and your college, not university, right? And Henning Larsen's. Is it the common practice that large offices, I guess, have, or it is something that's unique to your office, so they're just 1, 2, 3, 5 of them that are doing something like that? And what are the other branches of that PhD that stay still within architecture but do not keep you bounded into forever academia when you become unhireable after? not my opinion, something that I've heard.
Someone else's opinion. Yeah.
Oh, no, just unhireable portion.
Yeah, I
when
mean,
you have a PhD, you become unhireable. So
I would
the
say that
question
when you
should
have
be-
an architecture degree, you're also not super high. But I mean, I can say one aspect of this. This is not unique to. There is a uniqueness to Henning Larsen, but it's more unique to Scandinavia. Like this is a Scandinavian, the Danish Innovation Fund, that they have a declared goal to bring academia and practice closer together. So they fund those things, and they give me half of my salary for the entire period of my PhD. The other half comes from Ramboll Foundation. And this is why in Henning Larsen we have 6 PhDs. And in all the other offices in Denmark, there's another 3 altogether. Because we have that architecture, the business model doesn't give a lot of spare money to pay for R&D. We don't have passive income, we don't have all of these kind of meat that we can bite off to do research, and that's why we were very lucky at Henning Larsen to be part of Ramboll. But this industrial PhD program, every year there's 300 people starting it, and there's maybe 2 architects. So there's a lot in pharma, there's a lot in tech, there's a lot in fields that have this. This is what we're doing is quite unique. So I would say move to Denmark. And
Well,
yeah.
give me 3 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, 3 years.
I might second that. I think a lot of us maybe want to move to a different place and explore different opportunities. But that actually leads to a really good discussion, which Eric, you touched upon about the business ownership and the structure
Sure.
of the company. And I think you just touched upon the fact that Henning Larsen can put a lot of efforts into the R&D is because perhaps it's not completely reliant on this like a profit, short-term profit. We have to make the most amount of money by doing the projects that we do, but how do we think about the long-term gain, and by contributing some of that for future gains, right? And sharing with the larger world and larger architectural profession and others. So could you maybe talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. I'll say over the course of my career, I've not seen the amount of pressure the industry's under as we're seeing now, between kind of small practices and then incredibly large architecture companies. There seems to be kind of a missing middle, which I think mirrors a lot of things happening around the globe. So in terms of how it worked for us, to kind of hold the values of the company and the mission of the company, it required a different ownership structure than the partnership that Henning Larsen was before. And part of that was really about scale and reach, but the other part of it was to hold true to the mission of the company itself. And the company approached Ramboll and actually inquired about becoming the architecture firm as part of their larger entity. And it was because of the mission alignment between the two that solved that challenge. So I'll say that it took that out of the equation. It also ensured the company will be around for an incredibly long time. So that also has given us a lot of value to our clients, particularly university clients, for instance, because they know who we are and that we're not going anywhere. But I'm dodging, I guess, the question you're asking, because I feel that I addressed it a little bit in terms of the mechanisms of the funding and how it allows us to do the research and development. But I wanted to take the chance to respond to you to also speak about kind of the pressures the industry's under and how hard it is to continue to hold true to a mission as a firm beyond the profit. So we're struggling to find solutions for how to do that as an industry. This is one mechanism that the company was able to find, but certainly I think as an industry we need to identify other ways where we can value, and I think the open source side of what the company does ensures that at least others can gain a leg up from some of the knowledge.
Thank you. Any other questions from the audience?
Hi, my name is Benji. I'm an architect at Nitsan here in New York, and also a professor at City. Forgive me, this is a little bit of a dystopian perspective, but what is your view on what's preventing someone from feeding a closed language model and say, you are now a principal at Henning Larsen, and here are all the decisions you've made. You feed it all of the information that it's decided on design, collaboration with clients, and you'd say you are now this principal in this firm. What is preventing an AI from kind of replacing architects in that role? I think we see it in a lot of other industries of people getting placed out of the job. How can we as architects kind of prevent ourselves from being placed in industry, aside from production, of course? Producing architecture is always going to be a little bit more technical, getting a building in 3D and making it buildable. But from this kind of design oversight perspective, how do you see that role being replaceable as architects?
Well, I don't see this as dystopian. And I think that the goal of architecture, this field, is not to keep architects employed. It is to make good built environments, right? This is the goal. And if AI will do it better than us, then it should. The sooner the better. We're making some terrible architecture, and if AI is going to do it better than us, then we should be replaced by it. But if we go back to this IKEA metaphor, what is going to happen to architects is if you are not better than AI, then yes, you will be replaced, and that's great. If you don't want to be replaced, then be better than AI. Find what is the value that you bring on top of AI. And I think that this is, we're in America, so I think the free market is rooting for us here, because what is going to be objectively better is going to survive. It's not going to be legislated that you are not allowed to use AI, and that this is not going to happen. Everyone will be allowed to use everything if it's good. And if AI is going to be better than you, then either get better or find a different job. And I think that's fine. When we invented cars, there's people riding horses. They're like, oh no, we have to bend cars so we can keep taking people from one place to another in our carriage. But if you're not faster and you're not cheaper, get a driver's license or find another job. So I don't see this as dystopian at all. And I see it already replacing us in certain things because it does it better than us. I do see architecture as a more complex challenge than a lot of the things that are being replaced, that are much more kind of funneled into a small task that one person does only this task and that person is replaced, where an architect is orchestrating between a lot of different tasks, that some of them will be done by AI, but AI will be, for the foreseeable future, is going to be assisting you more than replacing you. And when it does, it's going to be because it's better. And I think that's fine.
Another question in the back.
I think building on your question that came in kind of late, you talked about the democratization of AI in architecture and how everyone's going to be an architect in a manner. You're speaking to a bunch of students who are at a school who are going to go into a field. How does that affect the value that they're going to bring to this? How can they look at it in terms of what they're going to expect for their salary? We're already underpaid as it is. We're going to go into a field with the expectation that AI can possibly take responsibilities away from you. Now, don't get me wrong, I think you can add value. But if you're an intern coming out, how do you know when to add value? How do you add that value?
Well,
I mean, do we need to change our philosophy in terms of what we're
well, 100%. But the first thing I would say that, at least I hope that nobody's here for the money. Like, this is not the reason why people choose architecture. Yes, we are already underpaid, but I think that my answer to this is that this is a really good point to approach this when you're a student. I think it's going to be much harder for people who are already established in the profession. This transition would be very difficult for them. But people who are students, I think definitely should start developing their own understanding of what is the value. There's not going to be a manual that says, oh, this is the value that you're going to bring, this is how you're going to make money, this is how you're going to secure your job. This is a very uncharted territory for almost everyone And AI is inherently very, very different from algorithmic technology because of its unpredictability. Because it is a machine learning kind of prediction technology, and that's why we don't even know how to use it in architecture properly. And this is something that when you're a student, you need to be prepared for a world where this is the standard. This is everywhere. And I think that some of the things that I mentioned about how the approach at Henning Larsen, I think everyone should focus on understanding what is AI. Because when I know what it is, I know what its limitations are, and I know where is the value that I can bring, and I will always be able to bring, because right now, the fundamentals of AI are the same. The capabilities are growing, but if you know what LLM is, if you know what machine learning is, if you know what image diffusion is, and this is information that is on the internet for free. Go type skills.google.com, 3,000 videos that will go through everything you need to know about AI. Everything that I know, I didn't go to this special training camp in Area 51 where only I have learned all this, like all of this is open source, it's right there for you. If you understand what it is, you will develop your own understanding of what value you can bring. And once you have that mindset as a student, I think that's actually like you will have a lot of advantage over people who might be already 5 years in the industry and 10 years in the industry, because you've grown into that world where this is becoming a standard. And I'm telling you, the industry is way behind, is way, way behind in terms of even realizing what AI could do to the industry. And if you come with a fresh perspective, you finish school and you say, I know AI very well. I understand an LLM. This is where I use AI and this is why. This is going to be wow. Because no one in the office knows any of these things. But the world is, you know, the ship is sailing, but we're kind of stuck. So it's actually, it could be a huge advantage for you as students, but get into it. Get comfortable with prompting and be kind of, you know, follow up on what are the new developments, what are the new models, understand the differences between open source models and closed source models, understand how LLM and GPT generates language. This is not rocket science. I've learned it, and I am not a rocket scientist. I'm an architect. I've studied the same things as you. I didn't have to write anything. For 7 years studying architecture, I didn't have to calculate anything, and I understand it quite well from the internet by myself. All of you can also do it, and it would be a huge advantage if you do, because nobody else does it.
Can I add one thing on that? Let me add a slightly separate perspective from that.
Yeah.
I'll also say the soft skills of us that you learn in school are fundamental to your career. Your ability to communicate with others and read emotional intelligence as a human. No matter how things are produced, I mean, the way that this business operates is looking the person who is your client in the eye and gaining their trust. That is how every decision is made. It is not made by anything other than that final eye look and reading the room. We can have a conversation about AI's, approach for that, but I will say those soft skills that you know about leadership, communication, clarity of an idea, engaging with peers, reading faces, changing what you say based on visual cues you're getting from the audience to kind of adapt and react to adjust so you can keep attention and control the narrative. Those are fundamental skills that you as an architect will use every single second of your career, and that are things you learn in school.
I want to add to this because I think it's in a way, it's complementing what I'm saying, that if you understand AI, you understand what it cannot do. You know what AI can do? Very, very impressive renders. Maybe don't waste your time learning how to do renders. I've spent God knows how long learning how to do very complex stuff in V-Ray. But if I see AI and I understand, I'm like, this can actually do it. And if it cannot do it 100% now, then it will be in 2 months. And maybe 100% is not even required. But what is it that AI cannot do? All the things that Eric mentioned. AI will not be able to do that. And if you understand the technology fundamentally, this is obvious to you. So this is where you put your focus, because this is where you bring value.
You're saying the same thing that I've been telling my students for the past 5 years of, I don't care if you spend 5 hours doing the renders, 10 hours, that is not the core skill that we're trying to teach. We're trying to teach how you communicate visually and also verbally. But I think what you're both getting at is, let's say for some of us, if AI is the enemy, right? Maybe it's a friend for some of us. Even when it's an enemy, get to know the enemy so you know how to, work with it and work against it possibly and find your value. And one of the values I think both presentations actually have touched on is the value of curiosity, right? Like if you're not curious, you're not gonna go and look for the different models, and you're not gonna look for, different ways of engaging with AI. If you're not curious as an architect, let's say more of traditional sense, you're not going to go and try out different materials. You're not going to prototype things. I wanna maybe talk a little bit about the question of prototyping. Like what is the role of architects in creating prototypes, and especially when we're trying to scale to larger projects, as you have illustrated tonight. Is there still some sort of a final control over it when you've started with just a portion of it? In some of your cases, you had bigger projects that it seemed like you had full control over it, but there might be chances where you create a prototype and then it takes on a different life. So how do you work with that?
Well, I think I think you accept the lack of control and acknowledge that that's just, all of us, when you open a project, you go and visit it and you're like, oh, that's how they're using the space, interesting. So like oftentimes I think you acknowledge just as an architect, you can't control everything. So using materials that change and adapt also I think clients really want. So the mycelium example, quartz and steel was talked about in New York for a very long time. Now that always changes. So there's always a conversation around the lack of the control over the material. But the prototyping question, I think to me, when I came into the company, was also about impact. And I grew frustrated as an architect about really scaling what I was doing for clients, and how often you feel that you're just serving a very small section of the community or a small part of the world. So I was very attracted by this model of testing something, R&Ding it, sitting with it for a very long time, and then open sourcing it and putting it back out into the world and trying to find ways to let it evolve and adapt and expand over time. So I don't know how to go a little bit deeper on that, but I think it just is I think it's a part of the practice that we should explore more as architects, because ultimately what we're all here to do is have impact, and impact requires scale. So creating something that can be used in a larger way than just for one project, I think are some of the lessons learned that we should all try to do in everything, that it could be taken somewhere else.
Yeah, I think I agree that a lot of what we do is kind of bordering fortune telling. Like we have to predict the future. This is what we're expected to do. We can't do it, but we need to make decisions based on some sort of a desired possible future. And I think that this goes to prototyping, but also to using AI and also to using data. It kind of ties it all together. The more we know when we make a decision, we're more likely to make a good decision. We're more informed. And I like to use metaphors. I'm going to use a metaphor that I came up with today at lunch with Eugene. Let's say I'm a chef, and they're telling me you need to make food for 50 people. I'll just make whatever I think is good. But then if they say you need to make food for 50 people, but they're all Chinese. So now I know a little bit more. So I might make a different decision. I still make the decision, but I'm like, they come from a different kind of flavor area. And then they tell me, those people are actually all children. They're all under 12. I'm going to make a slightly more adjusted decision into what food I'm going to make. And then they say, there's 2 people there that they have a deadly peanut allergy. So this kind of knowledge adjusts my decision. I'm still making the decision. I'm still the chef, but I know more. So I'm more likely to make a good decision. And prototyping is giving me a lot of knowledge. When I'm doing a project, and I'm still a student in a way, but I've been a student for so long. When you build a model, and I hated building models. I made nice models, but I hated it so much. And I mainly hated it because every time I realized that it was important, that I did actually learn something about my own project by making that model, by making that detail one-to-one. I was like, I want to prove that it's not important, but it is. And when you make a prototype of something, it really enhances your ability to predict what happens if I do it in a different scale. So yeah, it's good.
Thank you. I think I saw another hand there.
Hi. So my question was that we always
I think yes and no. Yes, the need will drop. Hopefully, the need will drop. I think we have way too many architects already. We're building way too many things already. We're obsessed with building new things, which I don't think we should be really focused on. A lot of the things that we are the only ones who can do, a lot of other people will be able to do to a pretty good level. That's why we will need to study at least 7 years, because we will have to bring value on top of all of these things that exist. There's a lot of professions that became redundant. You know, there used to be, when you called someone, there was a person who actually took your line and connected it to some other person. All of these people lost their job. But that's okay, because there's a better way to communicate. And I mean, I think it will happen, but it's a very big no for your other things. So if you are going to engage in architecture, you better be really good. You better add value to what everyone else can do. So study hard.
There you go.
Any other questions from the audience? Well, I think we've covered a lot of topics, but maybe as a final prompt for both of you, and I think the AI conversation generated like a lot of it, what would you recommend to our budding young architects? What they should be focusing on right now, where they should be what they should be thinking about for their unknowable future. What do you think is the maybe like a token of wisdom that you want to leave them with?
I've said this to my class, so Vlad has heard this. But your relationships are your superpower. The people that you're meeting here in school are, your future, future people you're going to start a company with, future people you might need a job from, future people that you might need to call when you're down on your luck. So each person you engage with here matters a lot. And those relationships are pretty fundamental to your success in this industry. So don't lose sight of that and all the busyness and all of the work to just show up for everyone here and continue to keep those relationships.
Yeah, I will second that. Does that mean that I support this, or that I'm not a native English speaker? So I would support that, and I would say that when I studied architecture, it was very, very clear that you need to make a nice portfolio. Everyone was like making a website, and then you just, you send your portfolio and you get a job, but that doesn't really exist anymore. At least, you're 3XN. In Denmark, you never get a job by sending a portfolio and getting hired. It's a premise that we are kind of promised, make a good portfolio and they're going to hire you. This doesn't exist anymore. People get hired because they are visible, because they know people and people know them. And this is hard to say because we have this ethos of like, my work speaks for itself, and it's a great idea. It's just not the case at the moment. So go to events, speak to people, connect on LinkedIn, reach out, have conversations. This will also be very helpful for you because you actually learn about other things, because you're not siloed in your own little thing. So reaching out actually also brings all the other people to you. So definitely do that as much as you can. And also learn about AI. Go to all those online courses, the YouTube ones, the Google ones, OpenAI has one, Anthropic has one. Become knowledgeable, become comfortable talking about this. You would be surprised by how few people are comfortable with talking about AI. I do these AI workshops in different places. I start by saying, who here feels confident to tell me what AI is? And this is the response I get. Exactly this. And this is, we're 6-7 years into this, and people don't even know what it is. So just imagine if you become knowledgeable in this, how far ahead you are. Do it.
Thank you both for this great conversation. Thank you everyone for joining us.